Okay, now for our interview with Benjamin Breckheimer.
I was 18 when I joined, and I graduated high school June 2002. I joined the U.S. Army Reserves in November of 2002 under the delayed entry program. So I wasn't quite ready to commit. I wanted to say my goodbyes to my family and stuff. So I didn't officially get to basic training until March of 2003. I think that was during shock and awe phase of the war, if I remember, because there was a lot of coverage of that going on and a lot of rumors in the basic training mill.
Rumors meaning?
I remember one distinct rumor going around. This was at Fort Benning when I was in like pre-basic training. Like you do a lot of your paperwork and stuff a week that prior to actually going to basic training. And I remember hearing a rumor going around that the entire 3rd Infantry Division in Iraq got wiped out by mustard gas and all this stuff.
Oh my gosh.
So that was, yeah, it was pretty scary. I think they kind of did that intentionally to scare the shit out of you, in all honesty. And it worked. It worked. I was terrified.
Yeah, well, we didn't know what he had at that point, but yeah, chemical weapons. I mean, certainly in Syria, apparently some major chemical weapons were used, but I don't think in Iraq there was ever chemical weapons used, as far as we know, right?
As far as we know. I mean, I'm a big believer that I'm sure there was chemical weapons around, but that has yet to be determined.
Yeah. What is it that the guys came back from Vietnam?
Agent Orange.
Yeah, that was
not exactly.
Was that kind of a chemical weapon?
I think it was. I actually need to talk to a couple of my Vietnam friends because I never really delved into their stories, but
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was actually a chemical agent.
So, but overall, as far as the Iraq War goes, extremely controversial war, obviously. But as far as U.S. casualties, I mean, it was very, very limited as far as U.S. casualties.
Yeah, definitely. Compared to, the wars from previous years, this is kind of, this was told to me and I actually didn't know it, but this is the longest ongoing war in our country's history. And that's pretty amazing to me because that's my whole adult life.
The Afghan war you're talking about? Or
the war on terror.
Or either one. Oh, the war on terror. Yeah. It's all how you define a war. I mean, we still have troops in Japan and in Germany. Does that mean that World War II is still going on?
No, you make a very good point. And I think, honestly, that's where this might be headed. We might have actual bases there for good.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it means it's an ally, and it means that, we can protect U.S. interests there and protect their interests. So you joined soon after, or right around the time of shock and awe in Iraq. Afghanistan war had already commenced, and both of those wars we had kind of immediate successes in. I mean, the Taliban was gone, so to speak, in Afghanistan. Soon after we invaded, and then in Iraq, Saddam Hussein was out very quickly due to shock and awe. It was really what happened next and kind of the nation building that becomes very difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And it's hard to believe that, our presence is going to change things in Afghanistan. I mean, they've been that way for 1,000+ years. And I'd be a little pissed off if someone was coming to my country and telling me I had to change.
Right. But, I remember the stories that came out of Afghanistan after we quickly won that battle, we'll call it. Girls that could now go to school, and I think girls weren't even allowed to play the piano. And the Taliban was very, it's a very sexist ideology, and so it certainly felt like we did some serious good there. Besides rooting out Al Qaeda to whatever extent we did that, but it seemed like we did really some good things for just the people of Afghanistan who had been suffering under this horrendous Taliban regime.
Yeah.
And ever since then, we've been trying to get things into shape to allow us to leave and allow them to have, a better government. And that's really been the struggle. And now I guess we might be leaving permanently.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that. I wish we'd kind of take care of our own country, mind our own P's and Q's for a while and let the world sort itself out. But that's unfortunately not the way things work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's foreign policy, and that's what gets really difficult because, even if I'm correct that we did some good in Afghanistan, right? Well, there's 100 places you could go do good in, right? Afghanistan's not the only country that suffers from poverty and oppression of minorities or women or what have you. And, is the U.S. going to take this on? Protecting national interests as far as rooting out Al Qaeda, that certainly seems to make sense. Hey, you're going to come, you're going to come and fly planes into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon and get away with it? I don't think so. Right. So then it's really just a matter of defining the root cause of the problem. I think that Bush seemed to believe that the root cause of the problem was kind of these dictatorships in the Middle East that, are not giving opportunity to young people and are teaching very anti-American thinking and so on. And he was going to democratize the Middle East and kind of started down that road. And, that's a long, expensive road if you want to go down that road. And the problem with the US is, every 4 years or 8 years, you get a different president and a different vision. So Bush may have been committed to that, but then, Obama comes in and doesn't have the same vision, and poof, there goes all of the blood, sweat, and tears, right? I mean, that's really what happened. I mean, Obama pulls out of Iraq, and next thing you know, ISIS or Al Qaeda in Iraq, pops up. And then we're back there again, trying to re-win some of the same battles that we had won before because of this change in policy. It's not to say one is right or the other, but that's the problem with America in wars, is that it's the leadership changing so often, right?
Yeah, definitely. 4 years is, well, you'd think it'd be enough time to fix things, but in the long run, it's really not ideal. Not much to be able.
Yeah. I mean, you still have it going on now because you got Trump saying that he wants to get out, and now Biden's wanting to get out. So, every president's always trying to reverse what the prior president did because they're from a different party. And you guys, the soldiers out there, are the ones kind of stuck in the middle, because that's, I'll never forget watching American Sniper, which I just think is an amazing movie, an amazing story. And, when they bring the battles to life like that, I forget if it was Fallujah, what was the main battle in that movie?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was.
And they're and I'm just watching and thinking, wow, look what these guys went through to take over this town, which I guess is an important city in Iraq. But as I'm watching it, I've already know that we since gave it back, that basically ISIS took over the same city that we had fought to get because of the change in policy of pulling the troops out. And, soldiers can only do the job that's given to them and, try to keep the politics out of their head, I guess. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? How do you kind of separate one from the other?
It's funny you bring that up because, there's definitely soldiers think about politics a lot, especially like the little minute things that are very nitpicky, not necessarily politics throughout our government, but just through our chain of commands at times. And it's, all these like, brain fart. Like not being able to fire until fired upon, but now you have to do three steps before you can actually fire a shot if you're being threatened.
Rules of engagement.
Rules of engagement. That's it.
Right.
It's just wild how that works. It's like,
fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
Exactly. And you're fighting ghosts, essentially. They hide behind kids and their wives and all that stuff. So you don't know who you're fighting.
What was is that the rule? I mean, what's an example of a rule that was most troublesome for you guys in Afghanistan?
That was definitely a troublesome rule. When we were doing a lot of convoys in Afghanistan, we'd have issues with vehicles that were pretty much speeding up to the rear of our convoy. And we'd first have to fire a pin flare. So we'd have to basically fire a firework at the vehicle to kind of warn them. But if they kept going, then you could fire a warning shot, but not at the vehicle. And then if they were posing an immediate threat, you could fire. So it was essentially 3 steps to finally be able to, eliminate.
But ultimately, you have to be fired upon in order to fire?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, yeah.
and that applies to almost all circumstances. I mean, you're talking about a convoy, but I mean, what if it was you're walking along and you come upon trouble?
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things that you kind of have to use your best judgment. Like if you see a weapon and you know it's a bad guy, you still should probably try and not fire at them, which is weird to say, but I feel like that's kind of how it's going, especially probably now. Well, I don't know now, but and then it's like they're in a vehicle and you're on foot patrol. That'd probably be a different circumstance if someone's kind of flying at you and has no show of stopping. And then you definitely could probably fire upon them without any issues.
I mean, perhaps it's the difference between, once we had already kind of won the initial battle and we went into kind of this peacekeeping role or nation building role, whatever you want to call it, that's probably when the rules of engagement change, perhaps.
Yeah, I definitely think so. It was really weird in 2009 when I went to Afghanistan because at a certain point in the deployment, we weren't allowed to do like night raids anymore. Like that was forbidden. Like the Afghan president said, U.S. troops aren't allowed to do night raids or anything anymore. So it's like they're giving you rules to fight a war, but it's just crazy. I can only imagine how things have been or are now.
And the Taliban just sits back and laughs at it because they've got no rules.
Exactly.
So tell us about your experience in Afghanistan, how long you were there, and ultimately I know that's where you were injured.
Yeah, Afghanistan was very different for me because when I deployed to Iraq, I actually deployed as an operating room specialist. So I was working in the medical field in the operating room, and I was in the green zone in Baghdad at Ibn Sina Hospital. So we were relatively safe. We'd only, have mortars come in occasionally in the green zone, and we'd have to go duck and cover. But we were in zero danger whatsoever, essentially. And I actually felt like we were appreciated in Iraq compared to when I went to Afghanistan. So when I went in 2009 to Afghanistan, I went as a cavalry scout. So it's totally opposite end of the spectrum from the medical field. It's a combat arms job. You're doing a lot of reconnaissance, surveillance, presence patrols, and painting targets that would be essentially eliminated if they needed to be. And, just going out on convoys and doing patrols, the elders, most of them just really didn't want you there. The little kids would throw rocks, spit at you, throw bottles of water at you. And I felt no appreciation being there whatsoever. So it's kind of weird to see 2 different sides of war in 2 different countries. But yeah.
And just to be clear, in Iraq, you did feel appreciated. People would come up to you and you could tell they're grateful for you being there.
Yeah. I personally got that feeling. I think a lot of the people I deployed with felt that way too, for the most part. But it's probably different outside the wire in Iraq than it was for us. But
I wonder if some of it has to do with how westernized the country is, because Iraq, I think, is way more westernized than Afghanistan, right? So
yeah, by far. Yeah.
Right. So Iraqis probably already very aware of America, watching American movies and
TV
and kind of liking
internet.
America. Yeah. Whereas Afghanistan,
like streetlights.
So Afghanistan, you would say when you're there, you feel like you're back in time 100 or a couple hundred years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these individuals live in mud huts essentially, and there's no electricity. They're very old school way of farming. They dig drainage ditch for their farms and everything. So they make it work, but it's definitely very much stuck in their ways. Mm-hmm. So it was very interesting to see that side, unless you were in like a big city like Kandahar, which they'd have,
Do you think some of it could have also had to do with the fact that they know that the Taliban is watching or aware, and so they have to at least at minimum pretend to be against you. Could that be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think of that until you brought that up, but that is for sure something that we were actually told. If they were to show any allegiance to the U.S., they'd be essentially, they could be killed, or the family could be killed, or at least punished in a very severe way. Mm-hmm. So I could see that.
So your job basically was to continue to try to root out the Taliban?
Yeah, it was weird. The big thing was winning hearts and minds. Like that was our main goal in the Spin Boldak region of Afghanistan. And it was just so boring. Like we were basically stuck on a forward operating base on the southeastern part of Afghanistan along the Pakistan border. And it was a main, like a hub for a lot of their trucks to go across the border into Pakistan and vice versa. So that part was pretty exciting, being around, patrolling, watching that area. But as soon as you got on the outskirts of the busier part of Spin Boldak, it was just, you're like thinking to yourself, what are we doing here? I mean, we're just sitting here on an observation post watching this village where we don't really have any good intel on. So we feel like there's no reason we should be watching it, but it's just, it's weird.
And what were you supposed to do to win hearts and minds?
That's a very good question, because I could never figure that out. I mean, just giving them MRE rations or water bottles is all we could essentially do. But I really don't know. That's something I was never able to understand.
And I imagine that most of them don't speak English, so it's not real easy to communicate with them.
Not one bit. We did have a translator though with us, and every once in a while he'd come out with us. But for the most part, we weren't really interacting. At least when I was there for the 3 months before I got wounded, we didn't really do any presence patrols by foot, so we didn't get to interact as closely as they did later down the road after I got hurt.
Yeah, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so September 13th, 2009 is when my life pretty much did a complete 180. We were 3 months into the tour, and we were on just a regular routine presence patrol in a convoy. And, just driving along, and in the vehicle, you kind of rig up your iPod to your comms so you can listen to music and also listen to radio traffic if anything important's coming along. So I remember I was driving the vehicle. I was the fourth vehicle in the convoy of 4. So I was the last vehicle. And we were just listening to music, singing a Kenny Chesney, country stuff like She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy. And everything just went black. Like I remember just pure blackness. And it took me a while to come to, I think I was knocked unconscious for about 45 seconds. And I didn't realize what happened at all. I just felt like we hit a brick wall. And what had happened was I drove over a pressure plate improvised explosive device, and setting that off, it went off completely underneath the driver's seat where I was sitting. And on the Stryker vehicle, there's a inch-thick armor plate, and it pushed up that armor plate and crushed my legs into the driver's steering wheel compartment. And when I realized what was going on, I just tried to gather up as much as a big breath, because just all the dust and fumes, you're choking on all that stuff kind of coming to, and things are really hazy. And I just remember hearing them scream my last name, like Breck. And I just let out this god awful scream. I can only imagine what it sounded like, but I'm sure it didn't sound too great. But I feel like it was probably good for them to hear, because they knew I was alive. But then as things started to calm down, I had looked at my legs, and my left leg felt fine. I could see my whole entire left leg. But I looked at my right leg, and I saw nothing below my right knee. So I pretty much assumed it was gone at that moment. And it was pretty crazy having that experience, because when I try to explain the feeling of that, I felt like my entire lower half of my body was just being squeezed by a vice. And there was like an immense amount of pressure. And I remember the adrenaline going through my body. Like, I didn't even shed a tear during that time. So it was kind of incredible to think that way. I didn't cry or shed a tear. But I just felt this immense amount of pressure below my waist.
Pressure and pain?
Pain, yes, but it was pretty much blocked off because of the adrenaline. So it was just really crazy what the events that kind of transpired, because when they were extracting me from the vehicle, they tried to bring me through the top of the vehicle, through the driver's hatch, and they couldn't. And I didn't realize this at the time, but my lower right leg was stuck in the engine compartment, which would be on the driver's immediate right. And they weren't able to basically pull me up through the top because my leg was stuck in the engine compartment. So my platoon sergeant had to go to the back of the vehicle, and he lowered my seat backwards, cut my seatbelt off. And I just remember him putting both of his arms underneath my armpits and just pulling. And that's when I felt probably the most disgusting thing in my life, just feeling my left femur kind of crumble, just feeling the bones rub. It was cringeworthy. Like, it was totally cringeworthy, but it didn't hurt, which was wild. Once they got me out of the driver's compartment, my medic didn't skip a beat. He started an IV right away, hit me up with morphine. And I just remember telling myself while this was going on and while they were sending up the 9-line medevac that, being a medical professional, I was kind of trying to, in my head, tell myself to keep calm, just keep breathing. And while this was happening, I remember my arms, because of all the shock and trauma my body was experiencing, my arms were just kind of like stiffening up like this. And my medic was trying to put the IV in, but he wasn't able to because my arms were curled. And he's like, "You got to straighten out your arms." I'm like, "Dude, I can't." Like, I think my body was just going into shock with everything. But he eventually got the IV in, and it was crazy how good that stuff works. Like, I don't remember too much of anything after that, aside from one of my buddies. I asked him how my teeth looked because one of my lower tooth felt like it was missing, and I was like, "Are my teeth all right? Are my teeth missing?" He's like, "Brother, your teeth are the last of your problems right now, and nobody wants to see your ugly mug anyways." So it was kind of good to have that feeling of knowing I knew I was going to be okay at that moment. I was able to laugh, and within 45 minutes, I was airlifted to Kandahar airfield, and I went into emergency surgery there. And that was one of the most terrifying moments in my life. Just seeing all the people in the ER that were looking at you, they want to get their hands on you to help you. But at that moment, you're so vulnerable, and you just feel like everything's out of your control. And, knowing that I was going to be on the operating room table and knowing what can happen on the operating room table was something that was definitely rolling through my mind. But, I was lucky. I ended up having external fixator on my lower right leg, as well as both of my femurs. And waking up and seeing that I still had both my legs was a pretty awesome feeling.
Is it fair to say that you were surprised?
I was very surprised. I was shocked when I woke up and I saw that, I saw my right foot.
Wow. You got to be very grateful to everyone, starting with the medic and your fellow soldiers, and then the doctors and everybody at the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. They did an amazing job. And I've been
getting you the helicopter so quickly too.
Yeah. It was actually the Air Force pararescue jumpers, the Jolly Green guys that came out and got me. And I've actually kept in contact with a couple of them, and I'm hoping to meet them again eventually sometime soon. So I'm getting kind of excited about that.
Did they actually land to pick you up, or they? Yeah.
Yeah. They landed. My platoon had set up a landing zone for them. Transferred me to the Black Hawk, and then
And you were pretty much the only one injured?
Yeah, I was the only one injured. My medic, I think he hit his head, but it wasn't anything serious at all. And I'm grateful that I'm actually the only one that got injured, because I feel like the putz that drove over the IED.
But you said you were the fourth car, so.
I was, yeah. And it's weird to think about, because I was following the tracks in front of me, and I must have been an inch or two more to left or right of the tracks, and I just happened to hit the pressure plate.
Wow. Well, the other thing to be appreciative of is that 1 inch of armor or whatever it is that they put in the vehicle. Are these Humvees or?
So they're Stryker vehicles. There's 4 wheels on each side of the vehicle, and it almost looks like a tank. And there's like, 6 different versions of them now. But ours is a reconnaissance one. So we had the driver, the vehicle commander, and like 4 dismounts. So there's about 6 people in our vehicle. And thankfully, I was the only one that got hurt, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, but I mean, but for that armor, you'd probably be dead, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty significant blast.
So, and what was the main thing they were able to do to save your leg?
So they did a limb salvage once I got back to the States, but the initial surgeries I had was external fixator placed on my lower right leg, which suffered the most damage. And an
what
external
is that?
Yeah, it's an external fixator is almost like an erector set. Like you can put it on all the limbs. I actually had a small one on my pelvis too for a pelvic fracture I had. But there's 4, they look like drill bits, basically. They placed 4 drill bits on 2 on distal side of the fracture and 2 on the proximal side of the fracture. So say the fracture would be in the middle, there'd be like 2 drill bit looking things on each side of that. And they put a carbon fiber rod, and it would just stabilize your leg, basically holding it together until
kind of this frame around your leg.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you've seen what Alex Smith had, that's exactly what I had.
Right. Yeah, I just didn't know what they were called, but now I know what you're talking about. So, and how many you had further operations back in the States?
I did. I actually got back in the States on September 18th, so 5 days from point of impact. And I was sent to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, which is kind of where my story began, because that was my first duty assignment as a medical specialist. And, one of the doctors I deployed to Iraq with, when he found out I was changing my job when we got back home, he said, "I better not ever see you on my operating room table." Well, September 18th, I was on his operating room table. And I think in the 4 years I spent recovering at Brooke Army Medical Center in the limb salvage program, I had at least 20 surgeries total. And I honestly didn't even know the extent of my injuries. I was pretty naive at first until this doctor, Dr. Joseph Shue, was telling me, he's like, "Dude, you're not going to go back and see your friends anytime soon. So you better just kind of take it easy on your physical therapy and just let your body heal." But 4 years in recovery was very humbling.
So, and when you say 4 years, does that mean that after 4 years you were fully recovered, or to whatever extent you were going to be able to recover?
Exactly. Yeah. 4 years, I was still active duty. And my job at that point was just going to all my medical appointments, going to physical therapy every day, and still doing very minimal actual military type stuff. But that was my job for 4 years. And I was unfortunately, medically retired in August of 2013. And that was definitely not in my books because I definitely wanted to stay in for life.
Mm. And what about PTSD? Did you feel like you suffered from that?
I do. It's gotten, I was going to say better, but it hasn't gotten better. It's just been a little bit more spread out. Like I have a lot of nightmares and insomnia. When I do sleep, I have nightmares. And every once in a while, my wife will hear me like scream in the middle of the night and she'll kind of calm me down. Or sometimes I'll just wake up in a cold sweat and panic and just catch my breath. Just because.
And we're talking about still today.
Still today, yeah, still today. And for the most part, the medications really helped. I know for a while I tried to have my medication lowered because I wanted to see where I was at. And I was actually at the lowest dose they could give me. And one of the doctors basically called it a non-effective dose. And it wasn't working. I actually had to go back up on my medication, which is
What medication is it?
Mirtazapine is what I use for sleep, but it's also for anxiety and depression, and also venlafaxine, which is more for depression and anxiety.
And do you believe that PTSD all stems from the accident or the incident, or
No,
from something else?
It actually started before that. It started after I came back from Iraq. Iraq was a very rewarding year of my life, but it was also pretty mentally traumatizing because, you know, at 20 years old, I had never, ever seen anyone die in front of me. And having that occurrence happen on the operating room table I was working on for the first time, I just remember this kid, and I always say kid very lightly because they're all pretty much grown-ass adults when you're fighting for your country. But this individual U.S. soldier passed on our operating room table after we've been working so hard on him. And I immediately thought that it wasn't fair that he was dying. Could have been younger than me, could have had a wife or kids of his own. And I was 20, single. I mean, I had parents and all that stuff, but I didn't have a girlfriend or anything. So I was like, I had to do more. And that's part of the reason why I changed my job. But just seeing the amount of death and the, physical traumas of war was something that I really struggled with. And I didn't realize it until like a year or two after I deployed to Iraq. I noticed a lot of things change in me. And my family noticed too. They noticed that, before I deployed, I was always joking around and very outgoing, outspoken, always happy and smiling. And they noticed when I came back, I just looked like I aged to like a 30-year-old at 20 years old. And I was no longer that bubbly, happy, joking person.
And what about, did you also have trouble with those feelings when you were back from Iraq or then back from Afghanistan of, guilt that, your buddies are there and putting their lives on the line and you feel like you need to be there?
Absolutely. Like I said, I was very naive. I didn't realize the extent of my injuries, and I should have, because I've worked on individuals that had these injuries. But I was very disappointed. I was very guilty of, being home safe. And I know my buddies are happy that I was home and safe, but I would have rather been with them. And I tried during physical therapy just to push myself as hard as I could to try and get back to them. But in doing so, I was just doing a lot more damage to my body. So I really had to heed the doctor's advice and let my body do the healing.
For the PTSD, I'm curious what kind of treatment you received besides the medication, because on our show, we've talked about this EMDR treatment, this rapid eye movement thing that they use lasers with and kind of it's a resetting of the brain thing. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. What I have tried, I've definitely tried the groups and individual therapy medications. They have almost like a nerve stimulator. I've actually tried putting it like on my temples and stuff, and nothing really kind of stuck. I just have been managing and dealing with it ever since. But I've noticed that, there's things that I can kind of focus on now that'll really keep my mind off of the perceived bad stuff.
Well, I'm happy to. I'll send you an email that has a couple links to this treatment. It's amazing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's there's one form of treatment where they want you to kind of relive some of the experiences, but then there's another treatment where apparently you don't have to relive them, which theoretically is better to not have to do that. But the whole idea is a left brain, right brain thing. And in REM sleep, you know how rapid eye movement and your eyes are going like this in REM sleep? Well, that's kind of a resetting of the brain apparently. And that's your best sleep and why you wake up refreshed because the brain has been reset. Well, they use that to somehow kind of reset the brain as far as memories and so on of the trauma. And from the couple of interviews that I did, it sounded pretty amazing and very effective.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd love to look into that and try it and bring it up to my doctors because that sounds like something I'd be more than willing to try.
Cool. So ultimately, after your 4 years, how much back to normal would you say you were? In other words, how good was your leg?
My leg was great. I'd still suffer from a lot of swelling and soreness, and even today I do. Today, though, the swellness will go away overnight. But back then, the swellness would stay for at least a week or two. And life was a lot different. Before I deployed to Afghanistan, I was young, happily married. I come back after getting wounded, and not long after I arrived in the hospital bed, my wife asked for a divorce. So that was, my life was kind of falling apart during that time. And I really started doing a lot of drinking, a lot of tinkering around with medications that I shouldn't have been doing. And, just a lot of suicidal thoughts and tendencies. And I really struggled with that. And I tell people, and this might surprise some people, but the divorce actually hurt me more than the blast did. It just, that one person you thought you could count on, that shoulder to lean on just was gone. I mean, she was physically there for a little bit, but then she was gone. And I struggled with that for years. And there was a moment after I had gotten out of the military, and this would have been 2016. So 3 years after I got out of the military. No, not 2016. Sorry. 2010 is when we got divorced. So 2013 is when I got medically retired. And then, there was a moment in my life where just one day I was hammered by 10 o'clock in the morning, continued drinking throughout the day, and was just really fed up with myself, fed up with my life, fed up with the pain and hurting. And I contemplated taking my own life. I actually had my handgun in my lap, and I was sitting at the edge of my bed with my 2 dogs. And I was seconds away from pulling the trigger until I happened to look to my left. And my sweet little girl, Asia, if you have dogs, I mean, they always look happy. Whatever it was in her eye really kind of snapped me out of it. And I thought to myself that, the harsh reality is if I would have taken my life, nobody would have known for at least a week or two. And my 2 dogs would be gnawing on my face to survive. But then I thought about, instead of taking away my pain, I'm creating a lot more pain for a lot of other people. And that's the moment when my life went back to where it is now. I'm no longer look at all the bad things that have happened or the perceived bad things that have happened as a curse. I look at them as a blessing in disguise because, if I hadn't gotten medically retired from the military, I honestly don't know where I'd be. If I hadn't gotten a divorce, I wouldn't have the wife I have now, who's amazing. And I decided that I was going to try and accomplish something with my life aside from just being a veteran. So I got into mountaineering.
Yeah. So that was kind of your rock bottom, obviously. And Asia, your dog was there to save your life.
Yes, she was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And before you joined the military, I mean, had you had any issues with depression or drink or drinking problem or anything?
Not necessarily, no. I think there's drinking is kind of big in my family, but there's a couple individuals who struggle with it. I've never really struggled with it until after Iraq. And that was pretty much my coping mechanism from 2006 till, I still drink, but socially now. But I don't use it as a coping mechanism anymore. So,
and before we get into the mountaineering, what is your bottom line advice to veterans who have, find themselves in similar circumstances to what you were in?
It sounds very cliche to say this, but hang in there. We live, unfortunately, in a society today where we get instant gratification, instant fixes, and sometimes our bodies and minds just don't respond that well to that. It took me 4+ years to get over my ex-wife. It's taken my body 4 years to recover from trauma. And we really just have to hang in there and never, ever be afraid to ask for help, because there's a lot of people in this world that are more than willing to help you and in any way possible. And also, you have to have a goal in life. That's one thing I really noticed about myself is I always have to have something on the horizon. And, when you get whomped upside the head by a baseball bat, metaphorically, because it all happens to one of us, whether it be financial issues, divorces, deaths in the family, stuff like that, it'll definitely set you back. But when you have something on the horizon to look forward to, it makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah. And unfortunately, suicide among vets is a way more common than it should be.
It is. And I noticed that with a few of my friends who struggle that, the VA system is a very good system overall, or at least I've had great success with it. But I do notice that some of my friends they still have this military mindset where they have to be as tough as possible to the very last point. And that's not a good way to be in the VA system, because you're not going to get an appointment for any issues anytime soon. So when the first sign of something's going wrong, you really need to ask for help. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the system waiting.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's a very good thing that PTSD is being so much more recognized, because that's something in your head. And when you're supposed to be a tough soldier, to have something in your head is not something that people like to acknowledge. But, we know that it is a real injury as much as a physical injury. And it's just proven.
It is. And George Bush actually calls it PTS. He, because it's post-traumatic stress. It's no longer disorder. You can actually heal it, essentially. And it's pretty awesome to think that, if you really try, you really ask for help, and you really commit to something, that you can get the help and get healed.
Yeah, just to recognize that it's simply human, and it would almost frankly be a little bit inhuman to not come back from war without PTS.
Yeah, and I will say, like, my family and friends have been a huge part of my healing. They've always been like my foundation, and every time they're at my side is like an additional brick on that foundation to build me up to who I am today. So I've been incredibly blessed to have such amazing individuals in my life to help.
So you embark on mountaineering, and according to what I took off the internet, your first climb I'm sure it wasn't your first climb, but the first mountain that you summited of the 7 tallest of each continent was in Russia.
Yeah, that's correct. That right? And it was, Mount Everest in Russia. It's
August 1st, 2014, which would have been approximately a little less than a year after your recovery, right?
Yeah, it was. Unfortunately, that wasn't the first mountain I tried. I actually tried Mount Baker and Mount Rainier in Washington State, and I didn't reach the summit of either mountain. And I honestly started to get that feeling of failure. I I say that because I felt like I failed in my military career, even though that was out of my control. I felt like I failed in my marriage with the divorce, even though that was really not my choice. But this was something that I really wanted to try. And not reaching the summit of either of those mountains was kind of demoralizing at first, until my guide, who's become one of my really good friends, Dennis, he saw what me being in the outdoors was doing for my mental health and physical health. He saw how much I was smiling, how much I enjoyed being out there, and how I was actually embracing the challenge, because it definitely hurt. I was still pretty soon after I was fully recovered, but I still had a lot of issues with swelling and pain. But he pretty much pulled me aside and told me what he was seeing in me, and he told me to stick with it, and reminded me that sometimes the most successful mountaineers don't summit as many mountains as they plan. So I stuck with it, and he gave me the opportunity to join a team to go climb Mount Elbrus in Russia. And I honestly had never even heard of this mountain before. So when I Google searched, yeah, it's amazing. I Google searched it, and I saw it was an 18,000 foot summit. I'm like, oh boy. Mount Baker is only 10,000 feet, and Mount Rainier is 14,000 feet. So now I'm kind of thinking, what the hell did I get myself into? But yeah, August 1st, 2014, I reached the summit of Mount Elbrus. And it was
it's obviously higher than the Alps. I mean, you don't really, again, when this being the tallest summit, I guess, in Europe, you would have guessed the Alps. Normally.
Yeah. It was very special to me. Obviously, because it's the first summit. But then, after I did the Google search, I found out it was one of the 7 summits. So that was pretty awesome. But actually, probably the one thing that really stuck with me on this climb was, for the 4 years after my divorce, I'd carry around my wedding ring, just as kind of hope that my ex-wife would come back to me. Like, if I climb these big, tall mountains, I'll prove how worthy I am, and she'll come back to me, sort of thing. And I can laugh about it now, but at the time, it was something that I really thought of. And I actually had that ring with me on the summit. And it's amazing what that little thing, cylindrical thing that weighed less than an ounce, could do to someone. And I actually chucked it off the mountain in Russia.
You chucked it off the summit?
I did. So it's somewhere in between the border of Russia and Georgia.
But you brought it with you, thinking that without the intention of chucking it off the summit.
Not at all. I just brought it with me. I thought it was my little good luck charm, sort of thing. And thinking back at it now, it's funny because I look at this mountaineering journey, and I started it because of her. I wanted to climb Mount Everest to prove how tough I was. And I give some of the credit to her, because she got me into this. And now, after I let that ring fly off off the summit, I found that it was the weight of the world was no longer holding me back. I wasn't climbing for her anymore. I was climbing for me. And that's when I really fell in love with it. Mountaineering became my drug. The mountains are my drug. So I decided to stick with it. And a couple months later, I got the opportunity to go to Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And unfortunately, I ended up getting sick on that mountain after a couple days. But I wasn't tough on myself about it. I actually didn't have
basically
that feeling of
altitude sickness.
Yeah, I did. I definitely caught something on the plane ride to Tanzania, but the altitude definitely didn't help it down the road. And I ended up just basically saying, I'll come back and try again some other day. So I didn't have that feeling of failure, which was awesome. It was just something that happens.
But on that same trip, you then attempted it a second time and got to the summit?
No.
Okay.
I actually went to Mount Everest after that in April 2015. And that was through the South Route. So you do the 9-day trek from Lukla Airport into Everest Base Camp. And that feeling of being in the Himalaya it was truly a dream for me, just to be able to be a part of an expedition and to do that trek in. And
so
get
we're
to
about
base
to
camp
talk
and
about
see-
your climb to the top of Everest.
The attempt.
This is the attempt. Okay. Keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you
was
went
weird.
there, but you went there with the plan that I'm going to climb Everest. I'm going to summit Everest. And this is in
Exactly.
2015.
Yep.
Right. So it's just a year after, and you're part of an expedition. And by the way,
Yep.
these things are not cheap, right? So, I mean,
They are not.
were you were paying for this out of your own pocket or what?
I actually paid for Mount Elbrus. I completely drained my bank account to pay it. And I say that as a young, stupid kid at the time who only had like $5,000 in his bank account anyways. So I actually bought all my gear, drained my bank account, bought the flights, summited that mountain. And I was like, well, let's keep this rolling. And, you know, social media is an incredible thing when used for all the right reasons. When I first got in this mountaineering thing, I'd Google search every famous mountaineer ever and trying to basically Facebook stalk them and find them and add friend request them, ask them questions through Messenger. And anyone that looked like they were a mountaineer, I pretty much friend requested. It was pretty creepy thinking about it now. But by the grace of God, these three individuals from New Zealand, out of all places, heard my story. They saw what my goal was and they wanted to be a part of that. So they sponsored me for pretty much the rest of my climbs. And
when you say what your goal was that to climb Everest or to climb all 7?
Initially, it was just to climb Everest. And then it grew into the 7 once things started really rolling.
Gotcha. So they supported you. You became part of their group in climbing Everest.
Yeah, they supported me. They were climbers themselves, but not big mountain climbers. So they actually didn't come with me on any of these trips until I went to a certain mountain, which I'll get to. But yeah, Everest in 2015 was an incredible experience. I was there for 2.5 weeks until, April 25th happened in 2015 when the earthquake shook all of Nepal and Kathmandu. And that was pretty much when my dream ended. And I was super, this sounds really selfish, but I was super bummed about that, knowing that my dream was ending at that moment. But, being caught in an avalanche after an earthquake from a serac breaking off of Mount Pomori directly across from Everest was, now I kind of one up myself. It was definitely the most terrifying thing I experienced.
Where were you?
I was actually coming down from Camp 1, making my way through the Khumbu Icefall, and we had just gotten to the base of the icefall and we're walking towards base camp. And that's when the earthquake happened. And I really didn't think too much of it. We were on the mountain for 2+ weeks already at this moment, going up and down. So I just kind of thought
you're going up and down to acclimate to the elevation.
Exactly. And, with my disability, I just kind of thought my legs were a little shaky. I was a little tired. They were wobbling. And then it got a little more intense. And I just happened to look down at the ground and I saw these rocks start shifting. And then my climbing partner and Sherpa, Purba, he goes, earthquake. And I'm like, nah. Like, I thought he was kidding. I really did.
Right.
And he's like, no, earthquake. I'm like, all right, I'm starting to believe you a little bit now, because I started hearing like little avalanches go off around us and saw even the rocks shift even more. And he kind of not necessarily started running away, but he kind of started walking in a fast pace away from the icefall, because the Khumbu Icefall is the most dangerous part of Everest on the south side. It's just these huge ice blocks as big as buildings that could come toppling down. And when he started hightailing it away from there, that's when I started taking it pretty serious. And this day and age, everyone has a GoPro or a camera of some sorts. And I actually had one on my helmet and flipped that bad boy on. And part of me was hoping to get YouTube famous. I only have 25,000 views now, but and I haven't seen a dime from YouTube, so that didn't work. But also, it was kind of It was obviously to catch what was going on, but it was more for my family. It's comfort knowing that I wasn't alone if I were to die. But my climbing partner and I were very, very lucky. We caught the very tail end of the avalanche and only got a little bit of a dusting over us.
Because how many people died?
At base camp, there's been conflicting reports. I've heard anywhere between 18 to 21. I think it's 20, but I can't be too sure of that. There was another.
So that was from
the
Khumbu ice fall crashing and sliding down over to base camp. Is that what happened?
It was actually from the opposite side of Everest. It was from Mount Pumori, which is directly across from Everest on the other side, between base camp. So it'd be like Everest, base camp, and then another mountain, Mount Pumori, and big, basically football field snowfall broke off, or not a snowfall, football field size ice serac just came tumbling down from Pumori and went through the midsection of base camp towards the Khumbu ice fall where we were. And we caught the tail end of it. Unfortunately, there were 100 plus wounded at base camp and another, I'd say 20 that died. But more traumatically is what happened to that country, because that was devastating to see after I got off the mountain. Just seeing all these people that lost their homes and family members. And unfortunately, the Nepali government is very corrupt. So they know that there's really no hope from their government to help them out. So it was very, very hard to see that on my way out.
And was that the end of the climbing for that season?
It was. That ended the climbing season for everyone. And one of my big regrets is actually not staying for the time I was supposed to be there and just kind of helping out throughout the country. That was one of my bigger regrets in life. But it was just that was. I really had to dig deep and think about what I was doing with my life if I really wanted to achieve this goal. And I took a good year off of climbing because I was shook. I really didn't know if I wanted to stick with this, and I decided that I did. So I went back to Mount Kilimanjaro in 2017. And I summited in February with a group of 17 other individuals who supported me on that climb, just being there with me and getting me back on that climbing train. So that was very special. And that became my second of the 7 summits.
And then just a couple months later, you're back in Everest.
Yeah, a couple months later. 2017 was a great year for me.
Is that unusual? Because I'm not an expert in climbing, but I'm fascinated by it. And I read Into Thin Air. I assume you've read Into Thin Air.
Oh yes,
John Krakauer.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Amazing book.
He is an amazing author.
Yeah. So that caused me to get really interested in all of it. But how is that uncommon to do 2 big summits like that within a couple months?
It is. More so doing like Everest right after Kilimanjaro is probably the least uncommon thing. A lot of people tend to save Everest as their last of the summits or one of the last. But I was in a point in my life where I was in really good shape, and with the help of my sponsors and the individual, my climbing partner, Shirin Dorje, who summited Everest 16 times now, on May 22nd via the North Route. So I went through China and Tibet. I summited at 8:20 in the morning, becoming the 3rd Purple Heart recipient to reach the summit of Everest.
Wow. Amazing. Only the 3rd to ever summit Everest, huh?
Yeah, the 3rd. And as far as I know, the last one to do it, which is unfortunate because I really want to try and get the first female Purple Heart recipient to the summit of Everest, hopefully in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And are you the first to have summited all 7 then?
I am, yeah, the first combat wounded and Purple Heart recipient to summit all 7 summits.
And that feat was, as we were talking about the other day, just completed last month.
Yeah, June 13th. My second attempt on Denali to finish the 7 summits. I went in 2019, the first attempt, And, the mountain and weather had a different plan for us, unfortunately. So we didn't get to the summit that year. Last year, everything was called off due to COVID. And I left myself zeroed out during that year and a half span to get myself into shape. And we were blessed with such an amazing team and great weather, and reached the summit on June 13th for the 7th of my summits.
And did you have those same guys kind of sponsoring you, or?
Yeah, same individuals from New Zealand were sponsoring me. I've been supported also by a nonprofit that I'm a volunteer and mentor for, called One Team Colgan Foundation. It was actually called American 300, and they decided at the wrong time to start switching names because it's caused a lot of confusion lately in the past month. But yeah.
Because what's the name?
One Team Colgan Foundation.
Okay.
But this organization and nonprofit is actually composed of a lot of military mentors and civilian patriots who have stories of resiliency. And our mission, essentially through this nonprofit, is to go out to military bases throughout the world and talk to soldiers, airmen, airwomen, Marines. And I've been fortunate enough to be on bases in Germany, England, Kosovo, Honduras, plenty of bases here in the States. And I was sharing my story, and I didn't realize the impact it was going to have on a lot of individuals, because hearing from them after I do my talks with them through email and telling me how appreciative and how inspired they are to just, kind of look past all the negative things in their life and focus on something that's truly good, whether it be climbing or just spending more time with family. So that's been a huge part of my healing process as well, sharing my story. And they started Purple Heart Summits under the umbrella of One Team Colgan Foundation because of me, to start getting more, not necessarily Purple Heart recipients or combat wounded into the mountains, but veterans and essentially civilian patriots in the mountains to achieve something that they never thought they could.
Wow. Amazing. Very cool. So a couple quick questions before we wrap up on the summits. So which one was the most difficult? Most people would assume Everest. Was that the most difficult or not?
Absolutely not. I didn't believe it, but it is definitely not the hardest. Mount Denali is the hardest. And wow. I say that because on Everest, you're blessed to have a lot of Sherpas and porters and yaks carry 95% of your gear. Unfortunately, on Denali, you don't have that luxury. Alaska and the National Park Service do a very good job of trying to keep Denali as pure as possible. So you have to carry all your own weight. You have to carry all your own food, cooking utensils, tents, your own waste, your own trash, and it adds up. I think before we departed, we averaged out to about 120 to 130 pounds we were each carrying.
Wow. Whereas when you're climbing Everest, are you carrying anything?
You are carrying the bare minimum. You'll carry a couple of snacks, extra gloves, extra puffy jacket, just in case you get too cold, and an oxygen container. But yeah, it's pretty amazing to think that Mount Denali is a lot harder than Everest. And I didn't believe it at first, but it's a true mountain. And another kind of fun fact is you actually climb more vertical feet on Denali than you do the whole time on Everest. So it's pretty interesting to think about.
And do you bring oxygen to Denali or not?
No, you don't. The only mountain is Everest that you'd use oxygen on. Most people on mountains like Denali may use Diamox, which kind of helps with like altitude sickness sort of thing. So it helps prevent any issues you might have.
At what elevation on Everest do you start using the oxygen?
I started at just over 20,000 feet, actually. It was a little uncommon. I started at camp early at the discretion of my Sherpa, who definitely knows Everest more than I do. So I definitely took his advice and started using it in one camp earlier, and it worked out great.
Now, does that mean you're on it 24 hours or just intermittently?
I was on it 24 hours at that time. Some people might be on it. They'll start usually at the North Col. I started just below it on the north side of Everest. And I was on it 24 hours, but at that point, I think we only had 2, 3, 4 days where I would need it. So that was, I think, 8 bottles of oxygen I had at that time.
That means you actually sleep with it then.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty eerie starting with it because I'd never wore an oxygen mask like that before and did a lot of physical exertion. And I really started, when they put it on me, I started freaking out a little bit. Like I was feeling really claustrophobic, and I really took me like 10 to 15 minutes to kind of settle myself down and just kind of get in a rhythm. But once you get into that rhythm, it's an incredible feeling just having that pure oxygen flow through your body.
And what kind of shape were you in before you climbed Everest? I mean, I assume you're running a lot and that kind of thing.
I actually don't run. I can't even remember the last time I ran. I do a lot of like leg and weight training exercises, a lot of strengthening exercises. And before Everest, what I would do is I'd wear like a 60-pound weighted vest, and I'd go to Planet Fitness and just crank up the treadmill on the highest incline it would go and go for at least an hour or two, just trying to get that weight feeling on me and just get my blood flow and heart rate going. And that was pretty much it. I know a lot of people tend to start training at least a year out from Everest, but I only started training maybe 3 months out. And
what was the last day like where you're, going up the final summit? What we call that last, the Hillary step? Is that kind of the last
that's
day?
That's on the south side. So when I went through the north side, you actually go through, there's 3 steps, and they're, I think, 10 feet, 20 feet, and a 40 feet, basically a rock face that you'd have to maneuver your way up. And once you got through those 3 steps, you were pretty much clear to the summit unless weather started turning.
So does it ultimately form one line to the summit, the north and the south? Gotcha.
Yeah, it's pretty wild actually, because that summit push night was something I will never ever forget. Just being that high up in the mountains and seeing when you're doing your summit push, you look down and see clouds and lightning underneath you off in the distance was such an awesome, just being as high as you are on your own 2 feet and seeing how high you are above the clouds is such an awesome feeling. And then actually there's a point on the north side where you can actually see headlights from the climbers on the south side coming up towards the summit. So it's such a surreal feeling when you get to that point.
Did you have any scary moments on there?
I did. I watch a lot of horror movies. So when I first started seeing the bodies, it was kind of like one of those things where I'd walk by them and I was like, well, what if this dude like just pops up and grabs me and throws me off the mountain?
But you probably do kind of hallucinate a little bit, right? Because of lack of oxygen.
Yeah, you definitely do. You really have to kind of play some mind games in your head. One of the things I would do is I'd try to beat my previous steps. So I would probably walk 10 steps, then I'd stop and take like 20 seconds to catch my breath. And then I'd walk 11 steps, and then I'd do another 10 seconds or 20 seconds where I'd just stop and catch my breath and try and do 12 steps. So just trying to keep my mind sharp like that. But there was one point on the way down from the summit where I was just incredibly tired at that point, and I was kind of putsy, and I was tripping over my own feet. And thankfully I was clipped in the line, because that could have been a good fall, but nothing too crazy. And my mom probably shouldn't hear that, but it's all right.
Yeah. And it's a morbid question, but I mean, how many dead bodies do you actually pass when you climb it?
Yeah. So I actually counted 7, and eerily enough, the very first one I saw was of an individual I met at base camp a couple days before. His name was Frank, and he ended up passing on his way up during his summit attempt. And just kind of walking by and seeing that body, and you saw some familiar clothes, like the jacket looked familiar, the boots look very familiar, and you're kind of like walking by, you don't really think too much of it, but you're like, wow, I think that was Frank. And then when I got to my camp, I had asked one of the other climbers I was with, she was from Poland. I was like, was that Frank? She's like, yeah, that was Frank. I was like, oh, I had just met this dude 2 days before. But yeah, I counted 7 total, and that was including him.
And they don't bring the bodies down. Is that right?
They don't. The only circumstances they will is if a family is really willing to pay for it, or if it's somebody of importance, which is sad to say. Otherwise, they'll leave them there. They'll push them off the path, and sometimes they just roll down the mountain in a crevasse.
That's got to really make you scratch your head as you're going up when you're passing someone who you just saw 2 days later. You're like, what the hell am I doing? Yeah,
it was that moment I started thinking to myself, this is real. This is, people really do die on here.
Yeah.
So I was.
Well, congratulations, my friend. You did it. And we did it on our 3rd attempt for this interview. But it was well worth it. I think the listeners are going to love it. I enjoyed it. Tell me real quick, what do you want to kind of promote or have people go check out?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So I'm just kind of go through one of my plans, or a couple of my plans in the near future here. I'm working on a book. I've actually started it over 1.5 years ago, and I've only got maybe 60 pages done, if that. So hopefully the next 1.5 years, I'll have that done.
You certainly have enough stories for it.
I do. It's going to be an inspirational biography book, but also I'm going to take the next 1 year or 2 off from any sorts of adventures, especially big mountain climbing. I think those days are behind me. But I had gotten the green light from my wife to try and get sponsorship to ski to the South Pole, to work on the Explorers Grand Slam, which is the 7 summits, and then getting to both the North and South Pole. But other than that, I really want to try and promote the nonprofit I'm a volunteer and mentor for in Purple Heart Summits under the One Team Colgan Foundation umbrella, which is at www.oneteamcf.org. And our goal is to have the first female Purple Heart recipient get to the summit. And hopefully in the next couple of years, we're going to raise enough money to get her there, whoever she may be. So if she's listening to this, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you again to Benjamin Breckheimer. You can check out him and all the great work he is doing on his website. Just Google Benjamin Breckheimer and you'll see his website. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.